of course, of course.
Fantastic. Okay. So I was actually watching your first YouTube video, um, kind of like the
Mm,
beginnings of Dawn.
mm,
I was really inspired. You mentioned sort of emissions being a primary factor or driver for the one of the reasons for kind of starting or getting into this.
mm.
And then you sort of suggested as a concept this vehicle rental company that would allow people
Yeah,
to go off for a jaunt in Australia and kind of explore and see the outback and see those beautiful places around there. Um, and I just wanted to ask you, what drove you to come to that first realization that you wanted to do something about emissions, and also how has that journey or direction changed for Jaunt,
mm,
first inception, that first sort of concept?
yeah. So low emissions transport, I guess, is something or minimizing my transport emissions has, I don't want to say it's something I've always been thinking about, but it's something I've been conscious of. I didn't get a driver's license till, quite late in my life. I think I was 27 till I got one. I was trying to ride my bike and take public transport for as long as I could and all those things. And when I did buy a car, I bought what was Australia had very few diesel passenger cars at the time. This is like the early 2000s. We didn't have all the diesel passenger cars that you had in Europe, and so to buy a very fuel efficient, the cheapest, most fuel efficient car I could buy was going to be a four wheel drive, and it happened to be a Land Rover because a Land Rover Discovery was quite fuel efficient. It was at that point I think we were just getting the diesel Golfs, Volkswagen Golfs were first coming to Australia, and everything else was petrol. And this was when we all thought diesel was the savior of fuel emissions as well. But it was a choice between like an early 80s Mercedes wagon that was the last sort of diesel passenger car in Australia or a four-wheel drive. Land Rover made a much more efficient diesel engine than most of the Japanese brands did, and I could afford one. And so I bought that, and partly I wanted a diesel because I was making biodiesel at the Melbourne Biodiesel Club, as it was then, in a little sort of community farm project near where I lived, and so when we weren't making that, and it was also this moment where you could actually buy almost 100% biodiesel at a few of the petrol stations in Melbourne. It was made by a farmers cooperative and then delivered to petrol stations, and that was exciting. And even then, you could, even if you weren't filling up with pure biodiesel, you could put a bit of vegetable oil mixed in with your diesel and lower emissions that way. And so that was my intention for buying the four-wheel drive that I did. It wasn't about the four-wheel drive features, but that did open my eyes, I guess, and my exploration up to the places in Australia that you actually really needed a full drive to get to, which is a lot. And sometimes from a capability point of view, sometimes from a ability to just handle continuous punishment for a day on corrugated roads or something like that. So it got me. We started using the vehicle, I guess, more, which is counter to trying to lower your transport emissions, but use it more to get out into the bush and hike and camp and do all those kinds of things. And so that sort of started my enjoyment of four-wheel drives. And then I bought a Defender, and we did, had a rooftop tent, and we were doing longer trips with that, out to some pretty remote places in Australia, which means, multiple days of driving and thousands of kilometres, and to get to, beautiful, pristine parts of nature. And you are conscious when you're driving for a day and just your fuel bill is your main, you're stopping to get fuel because you're driving for 2,000 kilometres to get to the place where your trip actually starts. You're very conscious of the amount of fuel you're putting in and burning just to get to somewhere. More so than you are, you get on a plane, and obviously that's worse from a transport emissions point of view, but it's, you're not really directly involved with the fuel cost and the use of fuel in that sense. And so there's two things of just realizing that we were creating a lot of carbon emissions to get to places that had a pristine environment free of carbon emissions. To broadly separate the city and the country in those two terms. But also that when I was out there, I really wished we had an electric four-wheel drive. Sometimes, you want to be driving in the bush in the outback and hearing the sounds of the trees and the birds and all those nice things, all those reasons that you go to those places, and not the sound of a diesel engine. So, and just purely from so from a selfish point of view, I wished I could hear some nicer sounds and have a car that was cheaper and greener to run, and there just wasn't an option. And having worked with startups and consulted on various projects, realizing that when you have this combination of a personal desire or a personal problem, and that you can marry that to a sort of societal problem or societal desire, which I could see in terms of the transport sales in Australia. So I'd worked within the for the car industry on certain things, from digital projects and things, and was aware of the car sales statistics. And Australia buys more four-wheel drives per capita than anywhere else in the world, anywhere. So you might, you think of America as having, big pickup trucks, and of course they do. And Ford F-150 is the number one selling car. Places like the Middle East, obviously huge four-wheel drive market. But in Australia, depending on the month, the top selling cars that month, you go through the top 15 and it's all sort of dual cab pickup trucks, Hiluxes, Rangers, those kinds of vehicles. Land Cruisers, so true four-wheel drives, a lot of SUVs, and I guess SUVs the new station wagon in a way, but still SUVs, and maybe in those 15 there might be 3 or 4 hatchbacks, and by far the top is dominated by 4x4s, and so that's a victory for the marketing department of automotive companies to convince Australians that everyone needs a vehicle that can take them to the outback anytime they need to go, which is not what we really do. But I guess a lifestyle vehicle, and so dual cab utes, pickup trucks, small pickup trucks as we have here, are by far the most common vehicle. And so if you compare that, these are the most popular vehicles in Australia, and you compare that to the few electric vehicles which were available, particularly 3 years ago, but even still, it's luxury sedans and kind of quirky futuristic hatchbacks, and those are your options. They don't mash to that other actual sales charts, and they're not looking like they will for a long time. So we're still seeing that the major automakers, I guess Japanese, US automakers, who are the big players, aren't planning on releasing those style of vehicles in a right-hand drive model for at least until 2030 and probably beyond. We'll see some mild hybrids, but when you consider that the market for the primary market for something like a Hilux in right-hand drive is really kind of Thailand, Australia, South Africa, and a few other places. These aren't markets that have huge EV uptake. So why use the precious resources in your supply chain, creating vehicles where the market doesn't really want them in that way, when you could be using all those components to put in more EVs for Europe and North America that do want them. So we're still, and now we'll probably see some interesting stuff from Chinese manufacturers and even Korean ones, but by far the majority selling vehicles here in Australia are not going to go electric for quite a while. So that's a bit of a sidetrack into that, but this was kind of me looking at that I guess emissions was one consideration through all of this. There's a lot of electric vehicles bring a whole lot of other benefits, bring some downsides too, but from my perspective, bring mostly benefits to the experience of driving a four-wheel drive in this case. And that the other thing was that I'd kind of spent my career taking emerging technology and figuring out how to, I guess, use that in a way that people could inspire or attract or sell to people, or wrap good design around emerging tech and take it from that moment where it had been an engineering project or by enthusiasts for enthusiasts kind of thing, and using it in a way that it could be exciting for the broader population. So from going from that really early adopter phase into something that could be, into a larger market. And I really saw that opportunity with electric car conversions, because the idea of, an electric motor spinning the wheels of something. I mean, we can do that with a Lego kit right now. That's not the tricky thing. In some ways, there is a lot of tricky engineering elements, but a lot of those had been solved, and some amazing pioneering work over, people have been building electric cars for 100 years and really converting cars in earnest for 10 years, and a lot of the really hard stuff had been solved, whether directly for the conversion community or by having access to OEM EV parts. And so making it work was a sort of a known problem. Then the thing was, how do you integrate that and build a car out of that, and not just a car that feels like it's got a motor that was never meant for it, or just some random gauges and things, and a complex way of maybe how do you start it and how do you do this? How do we take an old car and some new tech and put it together in a way that feels like it's a complete car? It was always meant to work that way and work together, and operates and feels like a car that you could use every day in 2021 or 2019 or whatever we started this.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow, that is, I mean, there's so many incredible points, and I can really sort of hear your integrity and how this is, a real mission for you in so many different ways. So that's beautiful just to hear that. I wanted to go back quickly to the biodiesel days, and actually, now that you've had a little bit of time within the world of EVs, do you ever reflect back on that and go, well, actually, there's some different alternatives there, like hemp oil, different things like that, carbon negative options for that. Do you see anything, since you've been so immersed in EVs for a little while? Do you now reflect back and go, well, actually, there are some issues with EVs here, but some potential EVs as well?
Yeah, I am so immersed in the world of EVs. It's hard to find time to look at other alternatives. But I think it is an interesting question. I think, and you'll have to excuse me. It is 9:30. I'm going to drink a little bit of wine while we chat. It'll make for better chats, I'm sure.
I'm on the coffee. You're on the one. It's good.
Okay. When I started using biodiesel, there was a big, and different parts of the world have used alternative fuels in different ways, and obviously ethanol has become a large part of the, I guess, global fuel supply as well. But biodiesel was considered. People were really hopeful for biodiesel, and this is nearly 20 years ago now. But we had things in Australia where we had a big push for LPG conversions. I guess 40 years ago or so, that was subsidised. The fuel excise taxing was much less. Conversions to LPG fuel tanks in your car was subsidised. There was hope that biodiesel might go the same way, that we would get fuel excise tax reductions on it. There'd be a bigger push for distribution and all these things, when we were considering that certain, I guess, farmers' organisations within big states in Australia were collectivising and producing this fuel in quantities enough to be supplying petrol stations all over the country. It was Australia does have its own oil supply and does refine a small amount of fuel still, but this was a fuel that we could grow, and we could own that fuel security and that energy security. But it never really happened, and obviously the fuel petrochemical industry lobby is obviously very strong. But I think the other thing was that there just wasn't a commercial interest in it. Your normal person wasn't going to put that in their car. If any hesitation from an auto manufacturer would mean that most people were never going to do it. The ability to produce in any kind of volume that would really make a difference is really just isn't there for biodiesel from a global car population level. And the other thing was that the large transport companies, so the heavy vehicle semi-trailers, who were really stood the most to benefit from fuel reduction costs, were and still are producing their own biodiesels. So biodiesel still is produced here in pretty large quantities, but it's done by the transport and logistics companies for themselves. And so the I guess the interest, I mean, it's a pretty nerdy thing to get into, alternative fuels to put into your car, and it makes for a great read in the Sunday paper every now and then that this guy's traveled around the country using, fish and chip oil or whatever. But it's not something that most people then go away and think, oh, I should do that in my new car that I'm still, paying off or something like that. So I think that was it was interesting sort of being, and I wasn't really like, I was using it myself, but I wasn't, deep within the movement or anything, but it was interesting to see the struggles of that, trying to create it, take a niche thing, and cultural change is the hardest thing to get through in any kind of technology adoption. It's not the tech, it's if you're asking people to change a habit in any way, and that's a big thing about EVs, right? It's a different habit, it's a different approach. Going to a petrol station is something that we've all grown up doing. Filling your car up once a week, once a month, not every night, is a very different concept. So then when we get into other alternative fuels, low emissions fuels, and all kinds that are available, more and more that are available now, and obviously other technology enables that, and often it might be an electric powertrain with an energy source that isn't just directly electricity, whether that's hydrogen or something like that. It's interesting for me. I love the idea of pure battery electric vehicles because it really democratizes and decentralizes the distribution of energy. And when you can put up solar panels on your own roof, and that creates all the energy that your house and your transport needs directly, that energy independence is a really, really, really powerful thing. Now, that's just my own personal, I guess, political views or philosophical views around how we should do these things. But I think that when you...
we're seeing the effects of that in Europe at the minute, with the Russia conflict.
Yeah.
So there's
yeah.
I feel you're absolutely spot on with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's empowering. It's empowering in one way as an individual to be in, whether it's you or your community or your town, to be in charge of that, the means of production. And I'm sounding like I'm reading Karl Marx here, but I think that from an energy point of view, when it's falling from the sky for free, that it just seems like something, particularly in Australia as well, that we should be harnessing, and partly because it makes people conscious of that, and so we've had a good 100 years of being very disconnected from the supply and the generation of energy. The coal power plants were way over there, and we didn't really have to pay attention to them. And you turn on a light switch, and there's the power, and that's fine, and you pay the bill. People who have solar are very, very aware of their energy consumption, just because it's kind of interesting, because they're involved in it and they suddenly know what a kilowatt hour is and that kind of thing. And I think that we see that as we've seen a provenance, an appreciation of provenance, whether that's in foods, more so, and hopefully will continue to grow in terms of textiles and clothing. Where's the raw material sourced? Where is it made? How is it made? All of those things. It's with some things you can feel the difference and appreciate, it tastes better, or maybe it doesn't, but maybe you pretend it does, and that's fine. But there is a tangible difference in some way. If I choose a green energy plan versus a dirty energy plan, my light bulb doesn't change at all. And in fact, it's really, the energy in the grid's the same anyway. I'm just paying a different bill. But when you produce your own energy, you think about it differently. And we always felt that when you repower a car with electricity, that is very unexpected. That makes you think about electricity. Seeing an old Land Rover move along silently, driving it, and it feels quite different. you are appreciating energy in a way that, I mean, maybe you're not conscious about this, but you really are thinking about energy production and sourcing and usage in a way that you don't at all think about when you turn on a light, sort of thing. So that's my love for battery electric vehicles. I think that there's still some really interesting options for it's not a great storage mechanism. Fossil fuels are incredible for energy density, that you can store. If it had a few million years to condense dinosaurs down into this perfect, power source, it's hard for us to compete with that. So the weight and density of energy storage for battery electric is hard. Hydrogen and fuel cells is pretty great. But again, you're back into this situation where the production, the refinement, the transport, the distribution, the sale of that energy source is then controlled by large global companies. And that's why someone's got to do it, but it changes again the way it goes back to filling up at the pump kind of thing. Now, there is potentially opportunities where you can have fuel cells at home. You can actually, there's ways to make hydrogen, all these kinds of things. It just seems to be an extra complexity, and it seems to be it is definitely not as efficient. All of these things require effort and energy to do. So the total energy usage going into to transport you and move you is much greater as soon as you add processes into that. So I still feel that the effort, everyone's pushing more and more and finding that battery electric, apart from some outlier applications, and one of those may be long distance travel in Australia, is going to be pure battery electric. But maybe what we see is, it's not a long range fuel tank that you put in. And in Australia, a fuel tank that comes with your full drive is never enough. So depending on where you live. So I live in Victoria, the kind of most densely populated southeastern corner of the country. You buy a brand new Land Cruiser or Land Rover and it's got like a 70, 80, 90 litre tank. That's probably fine. Now, Toyota Land Cruisers in Australia, most of them come standard with dual tanks. So they might have 180 litres of fuel tanks on every Land Cruiser that comes out. Over on the other side of the country in Western Australia, where Perth is 5 hours driving 5 hours is just the start of your trip. Anytime you go anywhere, those people will double that again, and people might have 300-400 litres of fuel in their four-wheel drive if they're serious weekend adventurers. So not professionals. This is just what people do, and I think there's one of those, just any upgrade to any car can sometimes go a bit crazy, and there's a whole scene around that and whatever. So that long distance travel, maybe it's you don't put a long range fuel tank in, maybe you just get a hydrogen fuel cell and you put that in the back of your four-wheel drive for that trip. Maybe you rent it, maybe you own it, maybe something like there's other ways to transport and top up electricity if you need those really, really long journeys potentially. And obviously there's hybrid things, and there's going to be special vehicles, or maybe they're just diesel electric hybrids, or more so, rather than more like, I don't know, submarines and ships work, that you've got essentially a diesel generator on board that's purely creating energy for the electric drive system, because it's the most efficient drive system that we've come up with.
I love that. I love all of the perspectives on decentralizing things as well. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of blockchain stuff as well in the early days of that, so I really understand the decentralization. It makes a lot of sense. I'd never really considered it from that perspective either, in terms of hydrogen is just going to be a continuation of what that's way of looking at things. Thank you for that. How then do you see this upcycling of EVs if there's not going to be right-hand drive versions made for the Australian market? How do you see that then growing and becoming available for the Australian market?
I think Australia is very slow to change and then very quick. Our adoption curve of any technology is, I don't know if I'm drawing the graph the right way, but slow and then fast, whether that's DVD players or electric vehicles. It's going to be when, you know, two guys in the, down the street have electric versions, or the new electric version of your pickup truck.
Yeah.
You're going to drive it and be jealous, and then suddenly it's going to just start snowballing. And the infrastructure rollout and everything, and that's all happening. That's really starting to pick up pace in Australia too. But the other side of that is, I think we'll be one of the holdouts in the world where we'll still be buying a lot of. There'll be, every manufacturer's still got a big, petrol diesel engine plant. It's very cheap, no R&D required. Just keep spitting out these engines for markets that have no emission standards like Australia, and so we'll still be buying, I think, a lot of petrol and diesel vehicles for a long time. The idea of upcycling EVs, I think, we're always going to be a niche market. It's going to be expensive no matter what. And while now it's very expensive, it will still be expensive because there is always will be a lot of human labor involved. And by that, I mean, when you're competing with a brand new car that's been done on an assembly line with, 400 robots and 5 humans, and they're producing this many cars an hour, that kind of thing, the labor costs are low, the margins are low, and they can produce a complete car for X price. Yeah. And I guess the comparison I draw, if I've been asked in another format where, will we see this being something where people might convert their Volkswagen Golf? And the real challenge is not in, is it possible? Of course, we could make a conversion system for that. We could integrate with all the electronics. We could do all these things. But presented with from a consumer point of view, presented with a $45,000 brand new Golf, electric Golf, with all the features and the bigger CarPlay screen and the slightly improved safety and all of that, versus the 5-year-old Golf that you already own and a $40,000 conversion bill, which do you choose? You choose the new car every time. It's got the marketing campaign behind it, and it's got all these things, right? It's when you're dealing with vehicles as an appliance,
yeah,
you inherently don't have, you might like your car, but it's different. It's a different use case. It's not a classic car, and it's not something that makes a lot of sense to keep on the road. And that's what we've seen. Cars are very, very good, very reliable, amazing, and boring, and that's their job as commuting boxes. But then you've got this other side of vehicles that people use for special reasons. So their own, whether that's four-wheel driving, or they want to drive the fastest, or they have a deep love for certain vehicles, makes and models, whatever it might be. There is special vehicles out there that are not just, it's not just about being old. It's about certain models that are outside of that. And I think that we talk about classic cars, and it's like looking back at music, and it's like, oh, didn't the 70s had amazing music? Well, yeah, but they had just as many bad songs as we do now. It's just those few that stood the test of time and bubbled up. So we see classic cars. Look at these old cars; they're amazing. Most of them were terrible, and they were scrapped a long, long time ago. But there's a few particular models that have hung around because they have some capability or charm, or a combination of those two. And I think for us, that's where that's the work for us. That there's these models that people want to keep driving for whatever reason. Whether it's or they've got a special need for that. So whether that, and we do some commercial vehicle work as well, but I think we're going to see, particularly something like we have this unique market where we kind of still have what are essentially 70s and 80s cars still being sold today. And things like, the Defender stopped production a few years ago, but things like the 79 series Land Cruiser, which is essentially Toyota's version of the Defender, ladder chassis, boxy frame, all that kind of stuff. That's still around, and they keep cramming in.
Incredible, it's mileage, it's kilometerage, isn't it? In Australia, you'll see them with the clocks going over 1 million, and
and even right now it's a hugely popular vehicle. It's a terrible vehicle with an 80s interior. It's uncomfortable. but it's amazing in a few scenarios off road, and they sell a lot to mines as well, and farms and all these kinds of things. But there's still a market for some of these classic vehicles that will continue to, that I think we'll see as an opportunity to give them, and some bought for, I needed to travel long distances in the bush, thousands of kilometres, and it will always need to be diesel, or it will be for the next 15 years. But there's others that it's just because people want to look cool around town and they maybe go, camping once a month kind of thing, or some combination of the two. And depending on where you live, electric can make a lot of sense. And I think we'll start to see more and more vehicles like that as not just our candidates, but people wanting to convert them. And even at an expensive price point, there's the automotive aftermarket in every country sort of sways to different models. In Australia, there's definitely a muscle car scene. There's very much a four-wheel drive modification scene where people will, buy a $70,000 four-wheel drive, off-road dedicated four-wheel drive, and then go and spend another $50,000 immediately making it even more capable, to the point where you can option accessories from some of the big aftermarket brands as a dealer fitment pre-purchase. So it comes bundled in your warranty from Toyota, even though you've got all these aftermarket accessories on. And then to an even more extreme, people will take a Land Cruiser 200 series wagon or 300 series wagon, so their top of the line Land Cruiser wagon, and take it and immediately chop the back off, extend the chassis, and turn it into a pickup truck. And so spend $80,000 on transforming this wagon into an extended wheelbase ute. Really, really strange things, because I don't know, you can get sort of a small amount of like American sized pickups here, but not too many. Anyway, so people spend a lot of money on this stuff for creating these vehicles that are designed exactly for the way they want to use it. So while we deal with a lot of older vehicles, as our technology develops, we can integrate more into the modern systems, and we've developed all these other components to do that. Then we'll start, doing these modifications for vehicles that might only be 5 years old.
Yeah. Okay. And so leading on to that, I mean, in terms of vehicles that are relatively steady, is that you started off with Land Rovers and Defenders. More recently, you're collaborating. I mean, stop me if I'm wrong here, but you're collaborating with Bendigo Tech School on a Range Rover Classic. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we started with Land Rovers. Like I've driven them for all my life, really, and I love them. But it was also there's obviously a strong community here around them, just like there is in lots of parts of the world. It gave us a focus, so that we weren't just saying yes to anything, and we weren't a one-off conversion shop. And that helped us refine a product and design a product and refine that. The other element is that they're a car model that or a brand that for a lot of their history didn't have very, very much money. So there's a lot of components that run through all the variation. So we could swap certain elements of the body panel and other areas of the car from 1958 to 2015 and interchange those pieces directly. And then even when you say Range Rover, well, Range Rover was just, it was their next car from the Land Rover, and it was just a better version of the Land Rover. And then the Defender, which kind of looks exactly like a Land Rover anyway, but just has some coil springs instead of leaf ones, really just took a lot of the work they did on Range Rover. So it's there's the element of similarity and understanding that, the gap between the chassis rails is this, and it's this on every model that they ever made, so our battery pack will always fit. But it's also working with one model. The other modifications we needed to do to the car means that we're dealing with there's a Land Rover parts supplier, and whether that's our local one or we're dealing with one of the UK suppliers, the supply chain stays the same, and all these kind of the terminology and there's a lot of parts bin mismatch and everything. So we intentionally started with a narrow window of make and model. In hindsight, we should have narrowed it even further. But
how would you narrowed it further?
Oh well, we should have just. So it's a little bit of a like. It was the start of COVID, and we had a bunch of people. We had just started building our first car, and COVID really hits Australia. We had a bunch of people in the queue who were expressed interest. They hadn't put a deposit down or anything, but they're like, "Oh yeah, we really want one." And we were like, "Oh, if we go out and we get 5 people who are interested, then this will continue. Otherwise, we might just hibernate, or how long is this thing going to last? A few months. We'll just kind of close down our workshop for a little bit, not knowing that it's going to be 2 years or more, or the rest of our lives, or whatever it's going to be. But we should have gone. Okay, it's just this small year window. It's just this model, this short wheelbase, just this style, exactly this, no variants. Do you want that or not? That's it. However, we were a young business and we're like, okay, you want this and you want this kind of other variant and you've got this car, cool, you're in, great. And so we're still dealing with some of that, those challenges now. But the other side of that is that it helped us understand that, the variances of vehicles that may say they're, maybe the same model from the same company. Now it might, and that model run might have been 10 years, and there's going to be little tweaks, but when we're dealing with quite tight tolerances because we're trying to squeeze as much as we can in, because fitting all the batteries and all the new components in is really one of the hardest bits in building an EV. Knowing the variations, not just in individual cars, because Land Rover, hand-built old cars from the 60s that have lived their lives on farms are never going to be, precise anymore, but understanding the variances and choices that would have had no effect on the original vehicle, but may greatly impede the placement of our battery pack or something like that. And it's not even a documented change; it just is something that's different. So that was useful. We were always very keen to move into Range Rovers because obviously they're very popular. They've gone up in value. They're a real collector's item. They're a lovely car and they're a lovely size vehicle, and they still have everything they were designed for. They're still great at. So it's a really perfect conversion. So we were really excited to start working on those, and we will with our sort of the system we're working on now, our kind of Generation 2 system is designed to work to be a kind of, in broad strokes, most of the system will work in almost any model 4-wheel drive. There's different brackets and adapters and different things, but starting with a series Land Rover, which actually is quite a small vehicle. They're tall, so they mislead you, but they're quite narrow. They're quite short. They have quite small engine bays, and if you can make it work in that, you can kind of make it work in anything. So the project, though, with the Range Rover project that we're working on with Bendigo Tech School is super interesting. And yes, it's a 1982 two-door Range Rover. And we'd always wanted to, start doing those, and we needed to. It's been wonderful to have a partner to collaborate on this development process with. But I guess for reference, the tech schools here are kind of a new thing. I think they've been around for 5 or 6 years. They run in parallel to high schools. They're not instead of. So these for sort of, I guess, high school students, so sort of 12 to 17, 18. And they are, I guess, the government's way of giving a lot of funding and resources for things that aren't necessarily needed in every school, but are useful to every student. So incredible advanced manufacturing tooling, so 3D printing and CNC machining and amazing VR studios and all this kind of design thinking and high technology capability. So they're often integrated with universities as well. So it gives students an option to do, in addition to high school, to come and work on some really, really cool projects and get exposed to sort of a different way of thinking and approaching stuff. So the school in Bendigo, which is a small town, what is it, about 120, 30,000 people north of Melbourne. It's actually where I grew up. So in a roundabout way, this is the connection of how this came about. But they were looking at doing an electric car project as part of their curriculum, and then it kind of got through to us. And anyway, so we got involved in in that, and that, from, obviously lots of meetings and different things, and we got there. But this was a project that from its inception was about female students doing this work. So obviously we're in an industry that is very, very, that's the wrong way to start it. There's just no diversity at all, right? It's like, our workplace is Martine, my co-founder, who I started Jaunt with. She's a woman. She's the only woman in our organization, and then there's 14 other white guys, basically. And I think, a lot of science, technology, engineering is obviously male dominated, has been forever, and it is in certain pockets is much more diverse, whether that's gender or racial diversity. But automotive is still, very, very one way. My dog has just found away into the room. So there's, so having a program that is designed to encourage what is 50% of the population who are vastly underrepresented in this area was really, really cool. And I think for us, it brings a few things. It shows that like a diversity of thought and approach for me, as a background as a designer, is just super important. It's what you want, because you're going to have design. Good design is just being empathetic, really, and understanding different viewpoints. And so and there's only so much you can do as one person and one brain, right? You want these different opinions and different approaches, different, people of obviously a very different generation to me as well, and all of these kinds of nice things that come with that. So their input, the student input into the design and the usability, and what gauges do you want to see? Like, what do you want to see on those gauges, and control mechanisms and all that.
Through that were sort of surprising or different for you in terms of with those workshops specifically?
I think, look, I find it fascinating watching this process, and we've done a few exercises. Our team sends through, we need to calculate the capacity of this battery and figure out these engineering trials. We know the answer, but we're creating these exercises, of course, for the students. And so it's been, to be honest, we haven't, the car is only a shell yet, and we're getting down to the fine details. And this is where it can, anyone's subjective opinion is just as valid, just as right as anything else. We're getting to that, and I'm hopeful to see some sort of quite unique approaches to some of these aspects. There is an element where we've been doing a lot of technical stuff, right? And it's sort of like we can do exercises and present some challenges and problems, but the reality is we're going to do it the way that our electrical engineers say we're going to do it. I've been, our intention with what we do is to, celebrate the classic car that it is, but extend that kind of design language into the modern era. And so it's been interesting seeing how much of that idea has, I guess that's what's surprising, is how much that has resonated, in that there's students who are, 15 younger, who have grown an appreciation of this, who are genuinely excited about this. I wasn't excited about old cars when I was 15. Not in that way. I mean, these are really old cars to these students. So it's been interesting to see how genuinely excited they are, and how appreciative they are of that, I guess, of the original design language, and bringing that forward and making that useful rather than changing too much. And I'm always fascinated with that, when you now can have access to all music, all design, all things, all the time, that you can, there's not such a monoculture in, say, design thinking or something like that about what's in fashion, that you can have a group of students go on a journey through a design language of the 1970s, of so long ago to them, that and then bring that out and bring the best of that out. Now we're I guess thankful that echoes a lot of our thinking that's gone into that too, and it kind of resonates, and we see our own kind of ideas of what we hope that'll come back. Not so the result is not surprising, because it's what we were hopeful for anyway, but the fact that they get to that result is what's really surprising and nice.
Awesome. And if you were going to walk somebody through their own conversion process, and let's imagine there's three people, one of whom has no mechanical background and no idea about EVs, one is a mechanic but no interactions with EVs, and one is a sort of EV expert, and you were walking through a conversion with those three people, what would be the first conversation that you would have with each one of those people?
I think that with that first person, coming from little knowledge, and you know, I probably associate myself more with that first person coming into this. I had
That's the person
done some
as well.
right? Yeah, I'd done some modifications on my car. You know, I put in some extra 12-volt power sockets and little things, but I was not a mechanic. I was not an engineer. I was not. I was excited and I like learning new things, but it is overwhelming. I can't talk. You know, we have people coming in who expect that I know about the old petrol engines of Land Rovers or petrol engines at all, and I don't. I've never learnt that stuff. I've never needed to. I take them out and throw them away, or give them away, or sell them, or whatever. But I think that is a challenge, because you are. How do you start to? You know, you can tell a story about each individual part and explain what it does in layman's terms. But at some point, you have to call it its name. And if you talk about the name of every part, well, that's that's a few thousand parts, and all of the theory that goes into all of those things. It became, it's just kind of it's overwhelming. And how do you remember, whatever, any kind of conversation or whatever, you might remember three things, whatever it is, whatever you're talking about with anyone at any time, right? So how do you walk away from an overview of something with hundreds of components, really understanding and really getting that concept? So I think, to me, I think an electric motor, battery electric motor, is a lot easier for most people to grasp, because everyone's used to, I don't know, like, it's a power drill, right? It's like, there's a battery, you put the battery in, it's charged, and you pull the trigger and the motor spins, and that's an electric car, right? And there's no idle on the motor? No, there's not, because is an electric drill, when you're not squeezing the trigger, is it off? No, it's just not spinning. So it's just not using any energy in that mode, and that's why electric cars are efficient in stopped-up traffic or whatever. So there's a lot of analogies you can bring back to give that understanding that I think is a little bit perhaps easier to understand than a petrol engine. But very quickly, it's like, well, do you have a mental image of what's under the plastic cover of that drill and all the other little components that are in that? So I think that's the hardest step, and that's what we've tried to do with our YouTube channel and TikTok and everything, is just dive into those details. And if you want to watch it twice, if it doesn't make sense, that's fine. There's only so much, but we'll keep trying, because I find it quite interesting. And
what is the motivator for you actually documenting this process as well? Like, whilst we're there, like, what's the motivator for you having a YouTube channel, having a TikTok channel? Like, what is it that you're hoping to share or do from these?
Yeah. Well, we knew that, like, me building a business that converts, that does expensive conversions on a very limited number of vehicles, is not going to change anything, right, in terms of carbon emissions or whatever. But as a direct result of the product we output. But if we can be inspiring, then that can change things. If we can help spread the word of what EVs can do, and that particularly 3 years ago when we started, the fact that EVs could be four-wheel drives at all, and we're yet to see any hit Australia, right? Rivian's not coming, they can't make enough of those. Will Cybertruck ever come? Like, we're still a long way away. So showing that electric vehicles can be four-wheel drives and can, work on a farm and can do all these things is a really powerful element of changing the conversation and shifting people's opinions. And if so that's with the, that original, business idea of wanting to build these cars for rent was to give people perhaps their first drive of an EV ever. Now, as we realized the conversion process was more expensive than we thought, and all the other modifications we had to make added to that cost, it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not really feasible if you put it all in a spreadsheet as a business case to go, we're going to buy an EV for this tourism location and do this, because it's very hard to make your money back on it because of the cost. So we need to build more cars, and that means private vehicles to build economies of scale to lower the cost and do all these other things, right? So we'll get there, and we'd still love people's first drive of an EV to be a Jaunt, but it's harder than we turns out building a car is harder than we thought it was, which doesn't sound too surprising in hindsight. So back to your other question, I think with those other two audiences, with our channel, it's really that inspirational element, and the other side is of course sales and marketing. You've really got to lean into what you can do best in any kind of communication medium, and for us it is telling those stories and just doing off the cuff, one take, deep technical dives. And we know that a lot of our customers watch that. They tell us that they don't necessarily understand it, but they love that we do and that we show the passion for it, right? And that's what you want. Like I was equating it when we started. We'd had a guy come in to do the silicon ceiling in the bathroom, like around the corners and stuff. And he was like, "Do you mind if I take some photos of the work for my Instagram?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no problem. Go for it." And I looked up his Instagram, and it was just him with close-up photos of all the silicon beautiful ceiling that he'd done in various bathrooms, and him just saying, "Oh, look how good this one was. It was amazing." And I was like, "I love this guy. If I'm ever doing any other ceiling, he's my go-to." And so that's who you want to do that. And so I'm comfortable being that silicon sealant guy to a lot of other people in terms of automotive and electric vehicles.
That's beautiful. Would you ever, I mean, this is something that I considered for this project as well, like the mission is to help expand and grow up cycling. So would you ever consider creating a course that might help people who are in a similar boat to where you were 3 years ago, learn and take those steps within a more sort of structured way? Because I remember watching one of your videos about documentation, and you were saying it takes a little bit to create that documentation, but once it's there, it can then go out and serve and do that sort of scaled mission.
Yes, and well, I guess yes is not the right answer. We will be doing that, but we will be doing that in partnership with Zero EV, who are in Bristol. So they have because I've they gave me access to the digital component. I haven't been able to go there physically, but it's a really great course. So there's introduction to electric vehicles. So there's level 1 and 2, and then up to city and guild level accreditation. And so that maps to our accreditation levels that we have in Australia as well. So the big thing was that there's a bunch of little courses around the world and other people kind of, selling little packages, but I guess you're spending money on a thing that gives you no accreditation, which, while you could spend the same money and get accreditation, the other challenge in training that we see is that a lot of the big auto manufacturers sponsor training in terms of apprenticeship programs in automotive, but they're service and diagnostics, which is very different to building a system. So this is like you want a condensed engineering degree, in a weird way around this stuff, electronics engineering degree. So the course that Zero EV's put together is really, they've got a lot of experience in building systems. So we'll be bringing that, hopefully next year, bringing that course to Australia and running those programs for people, because it's good. Yeah.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I love that, and such a beautiful way to spread that knowledge and that message and find the future silicon enthusiasts like yourself.
Because we're not, the market's so huge, the opportunity's so huge. It's going to be the future of keeping a lot of these cars on the road, and it's just a cool project to do, and that those skills translate. And I think for the school project as well, building an EV is the same tech but just on a big size to building an electric scooter or an electric bike or a hoverboard or a RC car or whatever. These are all the same skill sets and
Yeah.
same technology and same components, just scaled in a different way. So it's, if you're thinking about, what is future mobility and what are career paths out of that and all that, this is all the same tech, and understanding this stuff is critical.
Yeah. And I'm inspired by the potential for that cultural shift as well. You mentioned that, people are going to go for the car that's more recent, that's got the slight upgrades, that's got the marketing behind it. That cultural shift will come, like you mentioned, with some of the younger people on working in Bendigo, to actually appreciate this is what we've got, and it becomes more of a status symbol to have this upcycled thing.
Yeah.
Then people will actually go, oh, I could get a new car, or I could just upcycle my current car and get in touch with somebody down the road who has now been trained through ForEVa and yourself to do the whole process.
Yeah.
Exciting. I mean, I had a few more questions, but this has been such a beautiful conversation. You've shared so much wonderful stuff about yourself and your mission and what's going on there. I mean, I would just say, do you have any thoughts on a self-driving jaunt one day?
Yeah, look, you can go and buy a self-driving kit, Android powered kit, like right now, off eBay. And I would have a go of it. I'd be a little bit scared in traffic, but like the tech is there. The tech is there from that end. It's also there from the way we're building the cars. When we've got an electric motor and electric assist, electric brake booster, electric power steering. That's not just an electric pump into a hydraulic system. It's literally a electric motor with taking sensory input from the rotation. So we could very much make either a radio controlled jaunt or a fully autonomous, driven by an off the shelf system. I think that probably comes. I think it's not that technology is it's available as a kit that you can buy on eBay tomorrow. It's also available from a lot of manufacturers that are from an integration point of view. I think we see that we go from that kind of like advanced cruise control level to full self-driving has taken a lot longer than anyone thought, and it's not just here to here; it's here to way up here. But once that's cracked, I think that the integration of it's accelerating, stopping, and steering is all that's in a car, really. That if that level of autonomy off the shelf is there, then there's no reason that we can't be integrating it. And we have chatted about it. It's just, I guess, it's not our, it's not our unique selling point, and putting engineering resources into it now is not doesn't make sense as fun as it would be. But I think it's probably coming. I think we need to be building systems that keep pace with the expectation of what a car is and does, and you can be a few steps behind that because it's a classic car, but there's going to be a point where that's like I don't know, we put dome interior lights in our old Land Rovers and a few other, and stereos and things that they never had, because that's just why would you have a car without those things now? That maybe that will also be a thing that's just like you just assumed. We put integrated reverse cameras into the mirrors of all the long wheelbase models because, of course, we do. You don't want to run over something, but why wouldn't you? Seat belts, right? All these amazing high-tech features that we now add. So very likely in 5 years that might be just something that's just included.
I mean, it's something that excites me as well, just in regards to emissions as well. Because I just sort of parked on the road around here. There's sort of 90+% of the cars are parked most of the time. And so if you've got new self-driving, upcycled cars, then you still get that autonomy with a lot less of a requirement for those new cars to be produced. So there's a lot more sustainability gains along.
Yeah. The scary downside that always comes up with that is like you've got full autonomy, full self-driving, that staying on the road is cheaper than parking. So then you just create more traffic because major cities in the UK, the same in, you know, parking in central Melbourne is ridiculously expensive per hour. It would cost you nothing for your EV to just keep driving around in its most efficient state, and a whole bunch of cars just circling the city with no passengers could be a result.
That's probably true in that transition period. Yeah. I guess the vision that I would have is like, with these less of a requirement for cars to even be there, the car parks that we do have, or the parking spots on driveways, veggie gardens, and then everyone can just grow their own veggies.
Yeah. Well, so that my dream, you know, like, yes, we build and sell cars, but the dream would be, you know, like less cars, right? It's just you don't the idea of ownership of a car or many cars is, you know, we have one car in our family and we use car share when we need it for a second car, and you know, it's good and bad. It's sometimes, you know, there's some bad experiences with that, but it's pretty easy. But it's basically the options for, there's a few of those car share sort of locations within walking distance from my house. They're all full with, I would describe it as Australia's worst car. I mean, it's the cheapest car in Australia that they can buy, right? And so it's not inspiring and fun to use it. It's just a very, you know, it's a transport means. So it would be way more interesting if I could, you know,
if there was a jaunt in every one of those.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. And
thank you. Yeah.
Actually, one final question. Do you have anybody that you think we should talk to next? Regards to probably sustainability, and I'll tell you a few ideas I have. I'd like to talk to people that are making sort of hemp panels and sort of battery protectors out of different things that don't require original things. And then
we actually chat to, there's a sort of a friend of Jaunt's who has a huge hemp manufacturing facility in Thailand, I think, who is building hemp body panels, vehicle panels, and all kinds of stuff, who I could put you in touch with. I'd love to know more about what he's doing, because he's always hard to get in touch with or find time with. Yes. He'd be a super interesting guy to chat to.
That'd be fantastic if you could, because I was just thinking actually the sort of the battery cases and things that you need to create. In theory, you can have a sort of carbon negative version, which is, you know, drawn down from the we've got, as long as it had those material requirements that you need for
exactly,
protection and sort of fire safety. Yeah. But I think hemp is relatively sort of fire safe as well.
That's all. I'll have a think. They'll probably all be Australian contacts, but that's fine.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just took a note. I'll reach out to this guy Bruce and see who else I can think of.
All right, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you again, and lovely to meet your dog as well. And to hear
all yeah.
I'll keep following you guys, and I'll be excited to see how the Range Rover project goes with the tech school as well.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Look forward to
Thanks.
Take care.
Cheers. See ya.